Hi, Kelly Starrett here at Rogue Fitness to introduce the Gemini. One of the big problems that we're seeing in the kind of myofascial world and the self-therapeutic world and the mobility world is that we're seeing tools that have sort of been borrowed from other disciplines. You know, taping two lacrosse balls together to work on your thoracic spine and some of the tissues of your body works great, but those balls were ultimately designed for lacrosse. When we looked at the kind of the demands of the thoracic spine in the athlete, what we were finding is that those two balls poked in and did a pretty good job, a reasonable job of blocking the sort of motion segments of the thoracic spine, but really didn't capture the full facet, the full kind of structural movement piece of the spine. So what we set out to do about a year ago, 18 months ago, was to create a tool that allowed my scapula to drop off the side, was actually anatomically correct for the spine, so it had enough space for my spinous process to drop in, and yet had enough of a curve that I could create that moment of shear by draping myself and blocking that motion segment to create that motion in the thoracic spine to improve my overhead and improve my rotation, but that didn't also create too much shear. One of the other tools out in the world is a wedge from the 1950s made by these Norwegians, and it creates so much damage as one-trick pony. And really what we've done here is the durometer, the softness, the fact that if you compare this side to side to lacrosse balls, there's no doubt you won't go back. So what ends up happening is that this really does allow me to have a much better, more significant impact in my T-spine. More importantly though, not only are people going to jump on it right away when you get on it and you recognize that, wow, it really does block and purport to do what we say it purports to do, but one of the areas that we have a really hard time with mobilizing is the area between the cervical spine and the thoracic spine. So when we can load up this kind of T1 area more effectively, we end up correcting a lot of the head position. What ends up happening is the upper thoracic vertebrae tend to get a little bit stiff, and the lacrosse balls sink into the traps and don't actually make the difference that we're after. So I never kind of resolve ultimately this first rib position, improving the head position, improving the shoulder mechanics. But with the Gemini, I'm able to bridge up and actually get into that cervical thoracic junction and get motion into that segment. So when I tack or put my arms over and go side to side, it makes a big difference. Being able to drop your arms off to the side still allows you to incorporate all of that scapular excursion, but still maintain the kind of general stimulus of trying to open up the thoracic spine. So the other thing we found was great is that we wanted a device that allowed me to do some kind of acute trigger point work. So because it's easy to grip, I can get into some of those little bit of ugly tissues behind the shin, and once again I can still create the rotation because of the gripping texture. So the texture, the durometer, I can get in there and rotate and still take up that fascia and do a little bit more of that detailed work. The other nice thing about this is that the canyon created in the Gemini also allows me, we call it kind of the working title is the gun rack. Here's the gun, goes in the gun rack, and allows me to shear back and forth even through those big ugly muscle groups. So if I'm sitting up here, for example, and traveling, I can get my hamstrings in there and really get some distinct grip and roll as I tack and floss. Same thing can be done here, same thing on your stomach, kind of gripping into these tissues. So it ends up being kind of a workhorse pony, but the big idea, improve your thoracic spine, improve your cervical positioning, and while simultaneously being able to really do some kind of this trigger, subtle work that you tend where you get a little tricky hot spot. And just always a reminder, it's for external mobilization use only.